and NEWS1 to discuss the imperative of addressing climate change and the steps the Biden administration is taking to engage both in the US and around the world around the issue of sustainability, as well as actions that private companies can take today to begin on the pathway of getting to net carbon neutral carbon footprints. So let me start with a presentation, and hopefully we'll have some time for question and answer. I hope everyone can see that all right. I come to you with my background having worked at the National Security Council and National Economic Council in the Obama administration, alongside then Vice President Biden, now President Biden, focused on issues around international economics. And then the key focus of the administration was on addressing the global economic crisis the country and the world was facing. Today, as President Biden takes office, the crisis is of course COVID, but just as importantly, and perhaps more with more impact, it's the focus this administration is placing on climate change and sustainability. President Biden, much like the commitment from South Korea, has made a commitment to be a 100% clean economy with net zero emissions by 2050. His target is to begin to lay out the methods by which the United States will get there by the end of his first term. And the first step in that has been the enormous energy and infrastructure package valued at $6 trillion that he has proposed to the U.S. Congress, which is set up to make historic investments in clean energy and climate research, innovation, and technologies, but also to begin to deploy clean energy innovations across the economy with a specific focus on the communities that have been most impacted by climate change, to also address the very connected issues of racial and social equities and economic inequality. By doing so, President Biden believes that this will create smart infrastructure investments around the U.S., everything from new commercial buildings that are more energy efficient, to clean water, to high-speed rail, and other forms of clean transportation, to solar and wind energy infrastructure around the country. By doing so, this investment in building of roads, bridges, buildings, and water infrastructure will not only prepare the U.S. to address climate change, but it will also be a major source of high-paid jobs created as a result of this action, hopefully by Congress and the administration. And the government also has a unique ability to convene, not just around the world, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also within the U.S. to bring universities, national research labs, cities, states, and maybe most importantly, businesses to the table to make new commitments to a net carbon neutral footprint and to an 100% clean energy future. In taking this first step to create a pathway to be net carbon neutral by 2050, President Biden is attempting to regain the credibility that some argue has been lost over the last few years in rallying the rest of the world to address climate change. That includes, of course, recommitting the U.S. to the Paris Agreement, It includes leading an effort at every international forum to engage other countries to put a positive pressure on them to set aggressive domestic climate targets. And it's to make sure those targets are transparent, they're enforceable, they're achievable, and they're balanced in a way that doing what's right as it comes to climate change does not put America or other countries at an economic disadvantage. And so I think we've seen and we will continue to see climate change integrated into U.S. foreign policy and national security strategies in the U.S., but in every embassy and consulate around the world. In addition to the positive actions this administration is taking, it's also going to take aggressive enforcement actions in the U.S. and around the world, both against fossil fuel companies and polluters who are harming the environment, ensuring communities have access to safe drinking water in the U.S. and abroad, and making sure that these solutions around development are inclusive and ground up. They're not mandates from the federal government or from international bodies, but really involve bringing the communities into the conversation. The historic investments that are being considered now in the U.S. are designed to leverage public and private commitments that total $5 trillion, which is the size of the budget for the U.S. federal government. It will be paid for in part by aggressive actions around the U.S. tax code to reverse a good portion of the tax cuts that were passed into law by the Trump administration in December 2017, ending subsidies for fossil fuels, raising the capital gains tax on investments, and other actions that will, in net, lead to a federal investment of about $2 trillion over the next 10 years. Making U.S. electricity production carbon-free over the next 15 years and achieving net zero emissions by 2050 is going to be a massive challenge for the U.S. Right now, just over a third of our electricity in the U.S. is carbon-free. About half of that is from nuclear power, the other half from renewable energy. But of course, this challenge gets even more difficult when you factor in that there are a number of nuclear power plants around the U.S. that are facing retirement and are unlikely to be replaced, which creates an even bigger delta in which the U.S. has to fill that with an extreme ramp up in renewable energy production. That includes everything from solar and wind power installations on federal lands to reforming the Energy Regulatory Commission and the Department of Energy so that our regulations favor renewable energy over fossil fuels. And it's ensuring that renewable energy and net carbon neutral platforms are an important priority for the financial sector and the investment sector. On that last point, we've seen a big movement, particularly by BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, in declaring in their letter to CEOs at the end of last year that they were going to reduce or eliminate investments in companies that did make net carbon neutral commitments. And this has driven a massive amount of activity in companies around the world, and particularly in the U.S., making pledges to be net carbon neutral by 2030, 2040, or 2050. You've seen as many companies make net carbon neutral commitments in the last year that have made it ever. Something along the estimate of around 250 Fortune 1,000 companies have made commitments just over the last year alone. This tripling of renewable energy generation in the U.S. is going to require a number of other actions, requiring all new passenger cars to be electric, all new buildings to have electric heat and hot water, a switching away from oil, natural gas, and coal, fundamentally transforming the way the U.S. economy functions. One powerful initiative to bring private companies around the world into this conversation is the RE100. It's designed to get companies to commit to 100% renewable energy, accelerating the transition to zero carbon grids. Companies in the commercial and industrial sector account for about half of the world's electricity, and so it's critical that if we're going to meet our global climate goals, that we switch this demand to renewable energy. The requirements to become a member are setting ambitious targets in this space, of course, sourcing renewable energy, the reporting and transparency you heard me talk about from the Biden administration of reporting progress annually, and communicating around the barriers that are faced to achieve these goals. Of course, this is all, both from the public sector and the private sector, very long-term goals. There will be pressure increasingly on companies, including on companies in the Republic of Korea, in order to be able to competitively sell their products and services in the U.S. They will need to make significant strides towards becoming net carbon neutral. The switch to renewable energy will take a decade or more. And in the meantime, there are, of course, things Korean companies can do via carbon offsets, particularly through what's called natural carbon offsets via reforestation and tree planting programs. I'm excited that the SK Group has been a leader in committing to these targets, as have other companies like Shinhan Bank and Hanwha. And I'm excited to hear the thoughts from Vice Chairman of SK at some point soon. But along those lines, I aside from my business as an advisor to a number of different investment firms, I'm also a senior advisor and head of international operations for Aspiration, a leading U.S. online financial service company that focuses on sustainability and impact, and in particular is committing to helping global companies meet the World Economic Forum's goal of planting 1 trillion trees through net carbon neutral targets via tree planting and reforestation. Because I know we want to leave some time for questions, I'll just quickly describe Aspiration. It's an 8-year-old company founded in Los Angeles that's raised $250 to $300 million from private investors, and in that time has brought on now 4 to 5 million customers, and is shortly entering the public markets in order to be able to provide its sustainability services and banking services, not just to the U.S. market, but around the world. It has received several accolades around the U.S. It is one of the most innovative and disruptive financial services companies in the United States. It's focused on sustainability not just because it's the right thing to do, but because consumers and employees view sustainability as one of the most important factors they make in their spending decisions, and both investments in sustainable companies, but spending with sustainable brands has grown considerably over the last decade and even more rapidly over the last few years. What Aspiration does is it works with companies to make their footprints net carbon neutral, analyzing their carbon footprint of their headquarters, their operations, their product lines, and then planting trees from their inventory of 5 billion, with a B, 5 billion trees that they have pre-negotiated pricing with with the largest tree planting and reforestation NGOs around the world. And they can deliver these tree planting campaigns in creative ways, enabling employees and customers to plant a tree with every credit card purchase, every transaction they make from a store or an airline or a hotel, and by integrating sustainability in the everyday transactions of both its customers, but also the customers of the companies that we partner with. We have successfully used these efforts to make dozens of U.S. companies net carbon neutral, to establish global partnerships with the leading professional services companies, home builder and construction companies, banks, and other major companies around the world. And we're looking forward to increasing our efforts and relationship building in Korea, where we believe there are a number of top companies that are already leading in sustainability and can increase their brand, their footprint, and their commitment to tree planting as a way to provide positive mitigation for carbon footprints as we all seek a net carbon neutral renewable energy grid in the future. Thank you.
네. Hello, Steve.
Hi.
Hi, this is Tiger.
Hi, Tiger. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I have a message for you. This is from SK. 네, 그대로 전달하겠습니다. 강연에서 SK그룹이 한국에서 처음으로 알립의 커미트먼트를 수행한 배경을 직접 듣고 싶다 하셨는데 말씀드리겠습니다. 첫째, 알립에 참여하지 않으면 글로벌 기업에 대한 부품 공급, 사업 협력이 어려워질 수 있다는 점. 둘째, ESG를 목표를 세우고 실천하라는 금융시장의 요구가 높아지고 있는 점을 고려해서 결정했습니다. 한국에서는 재생에너지로 생산된 전기를 쓰면 높은 비용을 지불해야 합니다. 그러나 그것이 알립의 가입을 피할 이유는 안 된다고 생각을 했습니다. 일단 먼저 시작하고 비용 문제는 정부, 사회, 그리고 다른 기업과 함께 풀어나가려고 한다. 이상이 SK그룹으로 속하는 메시지이고, 이 주신 분은 SK그룹 소셜밸류위원회 KJ1 바이스 프레지던트입니다. 이 정도로 말씀을 드리고 추후에 더 커뮤니케이션 하실 수 있도록 이메일 연락처를 이따가 드리겠습니다.
Thank you. Do you want me to respond to that message?
네, 이메일 주소를 제가 드리면 하셔도 좋습니다. 네.
Okay. Very good, Steve. Very good.
얘기를 한 김에 한국에서는 재생에너지를 통해서 조달하기가 쉽지 않은 현실입니다. 그래서 전기료가 기존 산업용 전기료 요금보다 높은데 미국은 어떻습니까? 재생에너지를 쓰면 전기료 요금이 더 높아집니까?
So it largely depends on the market in the U.S. The pricing of electricity from conventional sources and from renewable energy sources is different state by state in what's largely a deregulated market. And of course, the price of renewable energy is coming down all over the world as we get more and more capacity and better technology for both wind and solar generation, but also from biothermal and other clean energy sources. This, of course, is still going to take time to fully meet the market needs and demands. I think we're still far away from that, perhaps a decade or more. But just because it's going to take a while to fully integrate into renewable energy, doesn't mean that there's nothing else we could be doing in the short and medium term. There are measures all companies can be taking around energy efficiency, and in particular around mitigation of existing energy usage. And that's why I'm such a strong believer in the idea that not just that it's important to buy carbon offsets, but that it's important to build and rebuild a natural environment so that it can absorb carbon. The reforestation of the world's lungs, for instance, in Africa and in the Amazon, is responsible for as much as a quarter to a third of the carbon reduction needs that we have around the world. And I think that's an action that companies and countries can be taking right now.
네, 하나만 더 질문하겠습니다. 바이든 정부가 탄소 배출이 많은 제품을 수입할 경우에 미국 입장에서 탄소 국경세를 물리는 정책을 도입할 가능성이 있습니다.
I think we're probably a ways away from that because of the division in Congress, which is responsible for enabling and approving taxes around the issue of carbon taxes and increased tariffs on imports. But I suspect that the administration will increasingly face, this administration will increasingly face pressure to reduce imports of products that are produced with fossil fuels, that there'll be increasing pressure to reduce our trading relationship with companies that don't, and countries that don't make and live up to their commitments to around renewable energy. And frankly, if any country is serious about meeting these very aggressive, very challenging goals around a renewable energy future in the next 30 years or less, it takes making very aggressive actions right now and putting the type of pressure that I think you heard the SK Vice Chairman talk about on companies that will force an acceleration in this transition to a clean economy. I think that the politics in the U.S. will make that challenging in the short term, but I think it's inevitable that we will see those changes in the medium to long term.
네, 답변 감사합니다. 시간 때문에 더 하고 싶은 얘기가 있어서 여기서 마무리해야 될 것 같습니다. 오늘 답변 감사드리고 에스퍼레이션에서 나무 심기를 많이 장려하고 계신데 한국 기업을 포함해서 글로벌 기업에게 많이 확산되면 좋겠습니다. 오늘 감사합니다. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Excellent. Excellent. This is Young Suk. I'm recording it and give it to you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye. Steve, good job.